so they asked this guy, what's your most memorable sporting event? He didn't have to think about it. He said instantly, I want to tell you about the greatest sports hero that I've ever seen in my life, and the most memorable event that I was ever given the privilege to share with. He said it was at the Special Olympics. It was a 220-yard dash for boys ages 12 to 16. And he says they shot the gun off because they wanted to make it just like the big guys do it. And Andrew started running, and he was much, much better than everybody else. And he says he gets 200 yards, 20 yards from the finish. And he turns around to see if anybody's behind him, and the next closest person was 50 yards away. But he noticed a friend that he had made that week had fallen down. And so he stops to look at him, and then he looks back at the finish line. And the people, especially his parents, were yelling, "Run to the finish, Andrew, run to the finish." He said he looks again at the finish line and looks at his friend. And he ran back to help his friend get up off the track. And both of them finished arm in arm last. And Bob Costas said that's the greatest act of courage in sports that I have ever seen. And he said, too bad we only see it from those special Olympians. And then he said, think to yourself why they're called special. Well, sometimes we fall down, at least I do, and I hurt, and I need you to run back to me and help pick me up. It might cost you the victory. It might cost you something in this life, your time or your energy. But I'm sure that there are angels somewhere when they see things like we saw last night, or when they see us sharing care with one another, that they elbow each other or wing each other. And they said, did you see that? Did you take note of that? When Jesus died on the cross for everybody, that's why he died. Not so we could have big churches, even though there's nothing wrong with that. Not so the singing could be great or the preaching would be fine. But so occasionally we turn back and we go help somebody up that needs it. In Philippians chapter 2, it's one of the great pictures in the New Testament of care in action. And it's almost such an obscure place that we read through it and we don't understand what's happening. Beginning in verse 19, Paul is speaking here. And he says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also might be cheered when I receive news about you. Talking to the only church, by the way, in the New Testament where there's not a single bad thing said about them. The church at Philippi, there's no chastisement from the letter. There's no indication that they had any weaknesses or they had any struggles. So to this great congregation, somehow Paul knew that they needed encouragement, that they needed his son in the faith, Timothy. Now, let me paint the picture for you. Paul's in prison, and his health, whatever his health struggle, was already fading. We know that he had trouble with his eyes, and he needed help later on to write his letters because he couldn't do it himself. So here's an older, broken down man in a Roman prison. And in Roman prisons, you were chained to a wall. And unless somebody came to feed you, the guards weren't going to. So they would let people in to take care of you, to give you food and water. Well, that's what Timothy was there to do with Paul. But Paul says, you know what? I am more concerned with the church at Philippi, whatever he knew there needs to be. I want to send Timothy to you. Well, that makes no sense. Who needed Timothy more? If there's somebody in prison that's going to starve to death unless he has help. Doesn't he deserve to be the center of attention? But he cares so much for other people that he forgets what his needs are and puts them first. That's the kind of care that the church is supposed to have. It's not about me. It's not about what I need. But it's about who I can find that needs something from me. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 9. It says, 2 people are better than 1. And then Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, tells us why 2 are better than 1. And he gives us some examples. He said, let me tell you why 2 are better than 1. And he begins by saying, because if one falls down, if there's not somebody there to pick him up, how will he again stand? Well, he's implying if one falls into a ditch. I was at a house doing an appraisal inspection a couple weeks ago, and I have to stick my head into the crawl space sometimes for FHA appraisal inspections. And the crawl space was probably 7 foot deep. So I'm hanging down there, and I'm trying not to drop my camera because I'm thinking if I do, there's no way I can get down there and get it. It's a house that's vacant. It's out in a rural type area, a long ways from every place, so my phone probably wouldn't have worked. And I thought to myself, if I slipped while I'm hanging in there and fell down, there's no way I could get back out. And I'd probably starve to death down there unless there's snakes or spiders to eat, and then I would do that instead of starving. But then I told Kendra, I said, you know, sometimes, because she's quitting to let me work for her, and if she goes with me to those kind of places, if I fell into a hole, 2 are better than 1. And then Solomon says, well, 2 are better than 1 because if one is cold, the other can help keep them warm. And I think in Solomon's great wisdom, maybe he's looking towards the church and realizing that we need each other for the spiritual warmth that makes us able to bear up and not freeze to death. And when we fall, someone helps us rise again. And then we see this Paul who needs Timothy, and he says, you know what, it ain't that bad for me. Let me send him your way. Those of you who've heard of Lou Gehrig, he died on June 2nd, 1941. Anybody know what he died of?
Lou Gehrig's disease.
Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. In the month previous to his death, he met with a person he used to play ball with. And the guy says, how you doing, Lou? And he was skinny and in much pain. And he says, I'm pretty excited. They've started a new experimental drug. Oh, they can't cure my disease, but they have a serum that can take the pain away. And he said they decided to give it to 10 people, and it's worked 9 out of the 10 of us. And the guy looked at him and says, but you don't look so good. And he goes, oh, it didn't work for me. But he says, I'm so happy for the other 9 that it helped. And then he stands up before a packed stadium and said, I'm the luckiest person on the face of the earth. Maybe the few thousand who were there that day were lucky to see somebody who cared for the 9 more than he cared for himself. Now, I read about those kind of stories in Special Olympics, and I read about Lou Gehrig and his tremendous bravery and valor. That's in the world. Why aren't we hearing about that in the church? Well, last night we did see a little bit of it, but can you imagine if our primary focus for this Valentine's week and every week after this, when someone asks the question, does anybody care? They know we do. They know that we care for them. Now, I'm not making excuses for myself, but I'm old and dense, and I can't know what you need unless you tell me. But by God's help, I make a commitment to you. If you tell me, hopefully I'll try harder to do what you need.